I would encourage people to ask why they shy away from particular books and to be kind of curious about expanding their capacity to encounter difficult narratives. And that's kind of one of the projects of Deformative Fictions, to illuminate some of the ways these texts can matter in how they alter our relationship with maybe what I call more hospitable narratives.
From the heart of The Ohio State University on the Oval, this is Voices of Excellence from the College of Arts and Sciences, with your host, David Staley. Voices focuses on the innovative work of arts and sciences faculty and staff, with departments as wide-ranging as art, astronomy, chemistry and biochemistry, physics, emergent materials, and mathematics and languages, among many others. The college always has something exciting happening. Join us to find out what's new now.
I am delighted to welcome back Ashley Hope Pérez to the ASC Marketing Communication Studio. She is an associate professor in the Department of Comparative Studies, where she serves as Director of Undergraduate Studies and as World Literature Program Coordinator. Her areas of expertise include Latin American and Latinx literature, narratology and narrative ethics, youth culture and literacy practices, young adult and children's literature, literary free speech, which we're going to be talking about today, I think, and world literature. Dr. Pérez, welcome back to Voices.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
And I'd really like to begin with your most recent book, which is called Deformative Fictions, Narrative Ethics and Cruelty in 20th-Century Latin American Literature. And I wonder if you could tell us a bit about what this book is about.
Sure. So the real impetus for Deformative Fictions is giving us all readers a framework for understanding some of the work that really difficult and uncomfortable narratives do, why they matter even when, or maybe even especially when, they are distressing and uncomfortable. That's a question that I've been asking in my own reading and writing and teaching for now several decades, and it was really important to me to find particular ways to open up that question while also foregrounding new readings of Latin American literature.
So give us an example of a difficult narrative. What sorts of works are we talking about?
Sure. So one that some readers might have heard of, it was, kind of a sensation maybe a decade and a half ago, is Roberto Bolaño's 2666. It's a huge novel. And for listeners who can't see, it's like it's bigger than the Bible, kind of big. But the novel is difficult in a lot of ways. But one of the 5 parts is essentially a series of, I think it ends up being 111 descriptions of dead women's bodies discovered in spaces on the border between the U.S. and Mexico. And it's not Juarez, which is the sister city to El Paso. Around, in the 2000s, femicide was a very high-profile issue and question. It continues to be today, especially in the border spaces. But those are fictionalized descriptions that have a relationship to actual murders, but are not reproduction of them. And there are other things going on in that. But that's often the section of that novel that is so indigestible for some readers that it's a stopping point. And it's also really the focus of a lot of literary criticism on that novel. Well, I want to help readers both understand that particular difficulty, what's going on there in the context of the work as a whole, but also to think about why it may be ethically significant for them to be unable to settle on a reading that makes those passages not comfortable, but manageable. So why might Bolaño write this novel in a way that causes those to persist? And it goes beyond that kind of like witnessing or testimonial function that literature can happen. And I think it has to do with disrupting our expectations for what narrative and specifically fiction is, quote unquote, supposed to do for us, how it's supposed to allow us to feel.
And so in no way are you shaming a reader who might find that a difficult passage.
No, and in fact, one of the things that has been important to me over the years is to balance this argument that having deformative fictions, these difficult, hard to process, hard to read, and hard to stop thinking about narratives, having them be part of our kind of overall diet as readers is never to say that a given reader should read a given difficult narrative. And I think that as, a trauma survivor myself, there are books that might be really important to one reader and might really shake something up or shift something for them that I am simply not going to be the reader, So I think that that's always important. I would encourage people to ask why they shy away from particular books and to be kind of curious about expanding their capacity to encounter difficult narratives. And that's kind of one of the projects of Deformative Fictions, right, is to take readers on a journey to illuminate some of the ways these texts can matter, and not just matter on their own, although I think that's true, but matter in how they alter our relationship with maybe what I call more hospitable narratives. So, in teaching world literature, my students often find texts that I wouldn't necessarily categorize as deformative. They often find them that way. They find them very uncomfortable or difficult. And so deformative as a description is somewhat subjective. It's not a category that has fixed boundaries, but rather is more of a gradient. So I think of a kind of gradient between deformative and hospitable. And one of the things that I like to explore with my students is how reading deformative fictions attentively and with an eye to their ethical stakes changes how we read narratives that we otherwise might breeze through too easily. So an example of that I work with in Deformative Fictions is a really beautiful graphic novel called Day Tripper by Gabriel Ba and Fabia Moon, who are twins from Brazil and co-create a lot of different things. And it is the kind of everything about the paratextual materials for that book really highlights this
paratextual meaning
like the book jacket, the cover. It's like, wow, it's all the kind of cliches of world literature, like let's windows onto other worlds, a journey, a magical, beautiful journey. And one of the things that I work with my students in reading that graphic novel at the end of the semester is to see how when we've read Deformative Fictions, when we come to a text like that where we can slow down and where the text seems to make it easy for us, ask, well, why is that? And one of the things that in world literature we always should be attentive of is that hospitality, and you think about the hospitality industry, it is a forced performance sometimes. So for some artists and writers, if their work is going to travel at all, it has to accommodate readers, especially American readers. And so one of the things we explore is how we can look at the margins of the images and see what hasn't been foregrounded, where the difficulty is that a committed reader might spend some time with, as opposed to taking the kind of, staying on the tour bus, if you will, and keep staying on the cushioned seat. So I believe that Deformative Fictions can open up opportunities for how we can read more sensitively and more ethically, more broadly.
So who decides what is deformative fiction, author or reader, or both?
I think of literature as a collaboration between writers and readers. And I think Roberto Bolaño probably would set out to write a deformative fiction. So, you can think about intention. Another author I work with in Deformative Fictions, Fernando Vallejo, probably set out to distress and disrupt his readers. But as I mentioned before, the reader, given their experiences and their level of, tolerance, may be the site, too, of important judgments about what's deformative and what's hospitable. So it's actually, I think it's a critical frame that's useful both in terms of thinking about authors' intentions and in terms of thinking about readers' experiences. So, you introduced me so beautifully. Last time we talked about Out of Darkness, one of my novels, a little bit. And it's certainly not a book that I would consider deformative. However, some readers might.
Since you've raised Out of Darkness, you didn't set out to write a deformative work.
Right.
Yeah, Out of Darkness was not a deformative work.
That was never my goal or intention. And I don't, as a scholar of literature, not just as the writer, not just in terms of what kind of experience did I want for the reader, but if I were coming upon Out of Darkness, I think it gives readers the resources to contextualize the difficult passages, to locate them historically. It's a historical novel, so a lot of the pain in the book has to do with racism. It has to do with destructive family dynamics that went unaddressed at that time. So those are things that, in my view, are part of the fabric of the whole, but are not necessarily too difficult for an experienced teen reader to manage. Whereas a deformative fiction, I would think of as something that leaves a lot of sharp edges where readers who aren't experienced may cut themselves.
Mm-hmm. The last time you were on the program, we talked about Out of Darkness. And, well, we should say it is on many banned book lists.
Yeah, I was going to say, when we talked, it was the good old days.
It was the good old days. It was 2022, yes.
Yeah. Was it 2022?
You know what? It was 2020. It was 5 years ago. Yes.
Because 2021, in fact, that's why my banned books class the course number is 4021, because 2021 was the beginning of this most recent and absolutely devastating wave of censorship in schools and public libraries. So back in 2020, when we talked, Out of Darkness was just a quiet historical novel that had won some awards, was on the shelves of libraries without causing any problems. It had never been challenged. It had never been removed. And all of that did change in 2021.
All that changed. And we can talk about the implications of that, but maybe one way to do that is to talk about, and I misspoke. I said Deformative Fictions is your most recent book. That's not true. Band Together, Our Fight for Readers' Rights came out just this year, right? 2025.
Yes.
And I'd like to hear more about this book. And maybe I can start. Did this book come from your experience with Out of Darkness?
Band Together is a collaboration with some of the many authors and illustrators whose works have been banned, and it's sort of our both giving voice to the experience of being banned, but also foregrounding in as many ways as possible the essential resource that literature is for humans, but especially for young people. So that anthology I have been dreaming of since 2021, probably, because it is our answer to book banners, really, and it is a way of, beyond what we might want to say about the issue, it is a way of reaching readers, even in school libraries where our books have been removed. So in a library where Out of Darkness has been removed, where book banners have succeeded, and there are many such libraries, every single public school library in the state of Utah, Out of Darkness has been removed from. So, the number of places, the number of bans, we're talking about hundreds of school districts where Out of Darkness is not available to young people. However, a librarian who is building a collection in those schools can still shelve Band Together and help young people know what's missing from their library, help them know why that's the case, and help them know what they might seek out on their own.
Tell us about some of the essays in Band Together.
Yeah, so one of the things that's amazing about the collection, and is really rooted in what I saw with my high school students and what would draw them into an anthology, is that it's not just essays, it's multi-genre. So there's poetry, there are visual collages, there are graphic narratives. We have one of my favorite aspects of the anthology is that we feature several teen activists to show not just what young people where book banning is prevalent are doing, but also how young people in other parts of the country whose access has been unimpeded are nevertheless working as advocates for their peers across the country. So there's, just an incredible array of materials. I love my contributors who were willing to create whole fictional worlds. There's one story by Brenton Keeley, co-author of All American Boys with Jason Reynolds. His story captures the experience of the teen son of one of these sort of book banning enthusiasts, I guess. We see what is it like to have your parent drive action like this in your community. And it really powerfully captures the particular pain of that. And it's been interesting, for example, talking to teachers and librarians who have had students in that position who are frustrated with their own parents' claims about the books in the library. And so it felt really powerful to see him work with that experience in fiction for Band Together.
Outside of this book, is there a community of such authors?
There are many ways that we are working together, and I think that it's partly out of necessity. Being censored, having works removed from libraries is incredibly isolating, especially in the world of writing for young people. I've never met another author whose reason for writing wasn't wanting to reach young people, wanting to provide the stories that are a support and a resource for kids, for people coming to understand the world and how to navigate it. And so for all of us to lose access to the audiences we care about the most is extremely painful. And I think it takes kind of an ongoing effort of connection, of community building. I think about it as almost continually healing, because it's an ongoing wound, it's an ongoing loss every time a book is removed from yet another library. It's so discouraging. So yeah, we do this work together, because if we try to do it on our own, we will exhaust ourselves.
Within that community, or even just within your collection here, are there common themes or patterns that emerge?
I think that one of the common themes is authors writing the books or stories that they wish they had had as young people, or that they have seen young people they care about need. And so I think that that's probably the strongest through line in our experience, is that relationship to readers. Beyond that, I think one of the things I just was extremely grateful for in editing this collection was just how creative and varied the contributions are. You could imagine an anthology about book bans having a single note that might get struck over and over and over. And that's really not the case. So, I'm thinking about how, for example, Kelly Jensen's essay in this collection intertwines her experience having several of her anthologies, like Don't Call Me Crazy and Body Talk, be banned. She intertwines that experience with these incredible reflections on how young people come to know about their bodies or don't, depending on what resources they have access to, and how, her own experience, medical experiences, were impacted by lack of access to certain kinds of information. So, there's a way that folks are weaving the experience of censorship into other topics that they want to foreground. And so that's, I think, one of the real strengths of the anthology.
Well, and the subtitle, as I read it, was Our Fight for Readers' Rights. What do you mean by readers' rights?
So centering readers' rights is both about that commitment that authors have to reaching particular audiences, in this case, young people. Most of us in the anthology write for teenagers, but the book banning has impacted children's authors as well. But the idea of the rights of those readers is really in a long established understanding of school libraries as spaces of open inquiry. So whereas school boards have the discretion to make decisions about curriculum. So what classes are taught in English falls under the purview of a school board. The school board does not have the right to decide what range of perspectives can be included in the school library. And that's, rooted in several important Supreme Court cases. But what's important for folks to know is that that is a First Amendment right for readers. And First Amendment rights are not just about what speech you can produce, your right to say something, but also your right to receive information. And so when school boards across the country have removed texts in a pretty patently discriminatory way, discriminating against LGBTQ content, discriminating against narratives that address racial realities, past and present, removing texts about abortion, for example, those actions violate young people's First Amendment rights to access in a space of open inquiry when they choose materials that relate to those topics.
And we should be clear about Out of Darkness. Even if it's not in some libraries, people still have access to this. I can still go on Amazon. I can still go to public libraries, presumably.
Well, this is one of the questions that I hate, but because when people, I think it's one of the things that actually book banners like to say. It's like often framed in this way. They're like, we're not banning books. We're just removing them from school libraries. You can still go get them on Amazon, at the public library, have them in your own home. So
what's the point then of banning it in a school library?
Well,
and I'm asking you, I guess, to get into the head of a book banner.
Sure.
Maybe that's unfair of me to do.
Because, first, the motivations of book banners, they're rarely genuinely concerned about what kids are reading. If you think about content and concerns parents might have about content, what should they be concerned about most is their kids' unrestricted access to the internet. So, they are far more likely to be encountering sexual content online than in a school library. But what I would say about this question of access, well, why bother targeting books if kids can get them other places? One, it sends a message of disapproval of particular identities. So one thing that is really clear from the pattern of which books are waved around in school board meetings, including Out of Darkness, which has a Black man and a Latina on the cover, it is a emblem of identities that are under attack in particular communities. If you hold up Two Boys Kissing by David Levithan, it is a way of saying no queers in my kid's school. In 2025, when you cannot say, I don't want people like this in my kid's school, you can say, I don't want books like this filthy, disgusting thing in my kid's school. So it telegraphs disapproval of particular identities. Kids who share identities with those characters and authors are effectively marginalized and intimidated by those actions. So it has real consequences. It's also important to understand that for many kids, if a book is not in the school library, it might as well not exist. For rural students, public libraries are not especially accessible. For kids who don't have a credit card or, parents who are willing to buy them whatever they want, if it's not in the school library, they may not be able to read it. And increasingly, the same fights that we have had in school libraries targeting materials like Out of Darkness have come to public libraries. So the state of Texas has pursued legislation requiring any book that engages with sex or sexuality to be shelved in the adult section of the library, and only people with 18 or older are allowed in those parts of the library now. That's bonkers. And it's harmful. And it's, I think that one of the ways that the issue has been framed by book banners is that we want to protect our children. I think that when the fight is over, do these books help or harm, we lose. We always lose because different kids need different resources. The way I like to think about what is protecting readers' rights or what is protecting young people requires that young people have access to the resources they need to navigate their life experiences, the communities they live in, the range of relationships they may have. And for a book to be on the shelf for a reader who needs it causes no harm to a reader who doesn't want to read that book or who isn't ready for that book. And that understanding of libraries as spaces of open inquiry is rooted in the understanding that no book is for everyone, but everyone deserves to come into a library and find the books that they need. So that's what I want to protect. And that's kind of the anchor, I think, for advocates in pushing back against censorship, is making sure that readers' rights to access materials of interest to them, of importance to them, is not impeded.
Tell us about the Unite to Read project that you're working on.
So I thought that when I edited Band Together, I would really feel done. I mean, I've been pretty tirelessly working on this issue. I've done so many interviews. I've given so many keynotes. It's exhausting. It's tiring. And then I edited this anthology that I was like, okay, this is the thing. This is my answer. And then I had a colleague send me a call for proposals for the Mellon Foundation. And I started thinking about, wow, what would it be like to be able to steward, significant resources and direct them towards kind of a next level response. And I wrote a grant, it got funded, and the Unite to Read project is the initiative that the $500,000 that the Mellon Foundation gave us is supporting. And so there are, a couple of different layers to the Unite to Read project. One is extremely practical. The American Library Association has a resource called Unite Against Book Bans. It's an excellent starting place for anyone who's seeking to get informed about what's going on, and also includes an incredible catalog of materials called book resumes that basically in one page show the credentials of the books like Out of Darkness that have been targeted over and over, highlights the positive reviews, the awards, and provides an actual synopsis so that librarians or community members who are defending the books have a ready resource to understand the demonstrated merits of the books. And I will say, if we were to circle back to some of the important legal precedents around book access, highlighting the serious literary merit of the books that's targeted is extremely significant because of the fact that the legal definition of obscenity, which is something you hear obscenity and pornography thrown around a lot by book banners, a work that has serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value cannot be obscene, even if it includes sexual content. And that frame that we understand, for example, that the Bible has explicit sexual content, it is still extremely significant as a work of literature and should not be removed from libraries. The same is true for many of the texts that book banners have targeted. And so highlighting those literary merits is one of the ways, both legally and in terms of, public advocacy, for folks to push back and say, this is a resource for young people. They deserve to have access to it. They deserve to understand the world they live in. The Unite to Read project is working with Unite Against Book Bans to find sustainable and even community-sourced strategies for creating the book resumes. Because currently, unfortunately, books are being banned at a rate so high that the catalog of book resumes cannot be expanded quickly enough. So we're working with book clubs, with community groups to train people, essentially, anybody. My undergraduates can write a book resume once they know what they need to do, what they should look for. So we're training folks to be able to create those materials and help the American Library Association more quickly produce the resources.
You had mentioned earlier your comparative studies course, 4021, Banned Books and the Cost of Censorship, which I should note, you've won a Ratner Teaching Award for this course. I'd like to hear more about the course, about what students are doing in this class.
Sure. So it is one of the sort of GE upper-level citizenship courses, which I actually loved designing this course with that frame. I'm one of those people who give me a constraint and watch me thrive. I need to do this. I need to address the concept of citizenship for a just and diverse world. I want to do this work with banned books. How do I bring those together? It's been really exciting to use this discussion of current censorship and its impacts to have a broader conversation about different understandings of citizenship, who belongs, who gets to decide the terms of belonging, and what kinds of action are recognized as beneficial to a community. And so, in that course, we are both working with, a bunch of different frames for understanding citizenship. And then we're looking at how that intersects and how, for example, some ideas of citizenship actually are quite vulnerable to being co-opted by folks who are, carrying the banner of censorship. And so being able to understand how that happens is actually quite important to grasping why, for example, a group like Moms for Liberty has been so effective in disrupting readers' rights across the country. So we read banned books, of course. You can take the literature professor out of the literature course, but we read banned books, and we're reading them in a particular way, which is to understand how even the kinds of passages that book banners frequently cite as why they should be removed, how they function in the work as a whole. And that is I mentioned what is actually the Miller test, that serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value of a work, the Miller test for obscenity. But the thing that we always want to stress, and when we're looking at literature that's been targeted, is that test is for the work as a whole, not for any given passage. And so one of the things that I really work on with students in 4021 in the banned books course is seeing the works as a whole. And even if they themselves think, well, I don't think this passage is all that important, or why is it here, asking, why would the author make this choice? How does it function? Of course, this is like literature 101, when we think about why a particular element is there. But it's especially important for students to think about that, not just for themselves, but for other possible readers. So one thing we do is spend time imagining the reader for whom a book would be especially meaningful or important. And actually engaging in a kind of imaginative work of thinking, what kind of bridge does this book offer someone? And why might it matter for them to be able to walk across that bridge? The other thing that happens in the course, and this is where the Ratner Award was so exciting and important, is that students working in groups, design an advocacy project or a research project focused on current censorship efforts. And with the funding from the Ratner Award, I'm actually able to support them in enacting those projects and going out and doing the thing that they envisioned together. And that actually, in many ways, is sort of drawing on the Mellon grant model that we have, which is to support people in innovating approaches to responding to censorship and promoting readers' rights, so that folks who currently may have ideas or a desire to respond can build those ideas in community. So we create an online community for folks in the Unite to Read project, and we provide funding for their projects. So, there's a really nice synergy between the banned books class and the grant work, and then the advocacy I've already been doing, which I like. When I decide whether I'm going to do something, I try to notice if it sort of goes with the grain of the work that I've already committed to. And when it does, I can sort of see it as something that I can braid into the rope of my contributions as a scholar or as a public figure.
What's your next project?
I'm writing a novel. I've been having disruption after disruption, pandemics, the academic book getting tenure, this anthology being super banned, as my now 10-year-old said when he was 7. He was like, "Oh, Mom, you're super banned," which I was sort of like, okay, I'll take the super part. But one of the things that I have been working on for the past year and a half is reclaiming my own literary practice. And I think that actually in Band Together, my literary contribution to that collection is a kind of an effort to capture, like, what happens to writers and their efforts to create narrative worlds when the voices of book banners become intrusive. And so, I play with that in the piece that I have in Band Together, but I've also been working with that daily in rebuilding a writing practice where I hold the widest possible space for my imagination instead of having censorship contract that. Because I know whatever I write will be targeted. Unfortunately, that's the reality that the being banned once sort of becomes this, there's like a scarlet letter attached to your name. I don't know what kind of metaphor that is, but it carries over. The targeting carries over to other works. So I have to just accept that whatever I write, that will happen, and focus on really the world I want to create in my fiction. And you'll notice that I'm not giving any specifics because I'm not superstitious, but I'm very protective of work in progress. But this is a story I've been working with since 2016, and I am extremely excited to, I hope, this summer be finishing a manuscript. So.
Well, you anticipated my question because I was going to ask you what the novel is, but what we'll do is when it's published, we will make certain to have you back on Voices. Ashley Hope Pérez, thank you.
That was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Voices of Excellence is produced and recorded at The Ohio State University College of Arts and Sciences Marketing and Communications Studio. More information about the podcast and our guests can be found at go.osu.edu/voices. Voices of Excellence is produced by Doug Dangler. I'm Jen Farmer.